and totally the end of him. And as you were saying earlier, the government that was just before him put the country in a huge debt. And what we were suggesting was, and what we are suggesting, because I hope that now the president's going to nominate someone from the left, is that we need to raise taxes, to be able to invest in our public services.
We are hastily awaiting French politicians who are voting at the moment on whether to oust Prime Minister Michel Barnier. Barnier's leadership was called into question after he used special powers to push through his budget without a vote, but that meant he was subject to a no-confidence vote. Let's say hello to Catherine Norris-Trent now, senior correspondent for France 24 in Paris, while we await the result of the confidence vote. Good evening, Catherine.
Good evening.
How does this process work while we wait for the result to come in? How does the no-confidence vote work?
So basically, it was triggered automatically because Michel Barnier had forced budget legislation through Parliament using this constitutional tool. And Marine Le Pen has basically said that she will join forces with the left-wing bloc in Parliament and vote against the government. So it looks increasingly likely, very likely, that the government will now fall in less than 5 minutes' time now, which plunges France even further into political chaos, because it took more than a month to form this government. There were inconclusive results from snap elections that Emmanuel Macron called in June. No party has an overall majority in Parliament. No bloc has an overall majority. The alliances are very difficult to form. So it took more than a month last time to get a government. It could take even longer this time, although Emmanuel Macron has said he wants it to happen within a day. So he's been presumably already been trying out some names. It's difficult to see who could become a unifying figure, though, and the person would probably just face the same problems trying to get any legislation passed, criticised from both the far right and the far left.
OK, so what are we looking for in order for the vote to pass and the government to collapse? How many need to go with this? How many need to vote for this?
So just a simple majority, really. So you'll see the figures coming out. And if it's more than half, then it goes through. I think that should easily pass, given the numbers that we've been talking about in Parliament. And you'll probably hear a very noisy reaction instantly from the French MPs. They've actually finished voting now, we've been told. So they're going to announce it very soon indeed, and already the kind of horse trading is on, really. If you speak to the MPs, and they've been speaking out in the corridors of the French Parliament about where this goes next. So I think that Michel Barnier's government looks like it's doomed to failure, and probably if it is indeed voted down, it will become the shortest lived government in modern French history. So that's quite some feat, and really shows you just how much of political chaos at the moment.
Yeah. Stay with us, Catherine, if that's okay. Here in the studio, while we just await the result of the vote, that no confidence vote in Michel Barnier, let's speak to Charlotte Minvielle, who's a former French National Assembly candidate for the New Popular Front, here with us in the studio. Good evening, Charlotte. Good evening. Now, the New Popular Front might trigger some recognition from listeners because they are one of the parties, really, who've been instrumental in, potentially bringing this government down.
Yes, so it's a coalition of all the parties on the left, and it's very clear that the government didn't have our confidence from the very beginning, because President Emmanuel Macron decided to nominate a prime minister from the right, when actually the majority of the number of members of parliament came from the Nouveau Front Populaire, the New Popular Front, the parties on the left. And then what he did is that he forcefully put through, using the 49.3 article of the Constitution, tried to forcefully put through his budget, which didn't really respond to any of the things that we were putting forward to preserve our public services. So it was, for example, looking at cutting spending on hospitals when they're already at breaking point, cutting 4,000 jobs in the education sector, not targeting, putting the retirement pensions on inflation. So really not responding to any social justice for the French people. So there wasn't a possibility for us to respect that.
The issue is France is operating at a huge deficit, it is operating beyond the recommendations of the EU in terms of national debt, and something has to be done about it. Surely the parties on the left recognise that. Looks like we're getting the vote through now. So let's have a little look. I'll take this with you, Charlotte. We'll bring Catherine Norris-Trent from France 24 into this as well. Let's bring up the volume if we can.
2025 Social Security Finance Bill will be considered rejected. Given this vote, which was in conformity with Article 50 of the Constitution, and therefore the Prime Minister must tender his resignation to the President.
There we go. Short and sweet. Michel Barnier has lost that vote of no confidence, basically. So
Yes.
it signals the end of him.
It's
Charlotte.
the end of him, totally the end of him. And as you were saying earlier, you know, the government that was just before him put the country in a huge debt. And what we were suggesting was, and what we are suggesting, because I hope that now the president's going to nominate someone from the left, is that we need to raise taxes, you know, to be able to invest in our public services. And the president now needs to turn to the new Popular Front and to nominate a prime minister from our political camp, because clearly 3 months, as your speaker was saying earlier, it's one of the shortest prime ministers in French political history, and they weren't trying at all to form a majority with the left when we were actually having a majority.
Yeah. Okay, let's just bring back Catherine Norris-Trent briefly. Catherine, good evening. So the French Prime Minister there loses the confidence vote. That is the end of Michel Barnier. He can't have survived longer than 80 odd days. I mean, it's more than Liz Truss, but it's still pretty embarrassing. Where does Emmanuel Macron go now? Does he pick up on the suggestion of Charlotte here and pick a candidate from the left for Prime Minister next?
Well, I don't think he's likely to. He will probably look at all options on the table right now, but I don't think he's likely to, because a prime minister from the left-wing bloc there, the New Popular Front, could easily be voted down by some conservatives joining up with the far-right National Rally Party. And this has been a criticism of the left. We've seen ever since the horse trading began to try and form this government that's just fallen. They say that Marine Le Pen and the far-right party is basically holding any government to ransom, saying that they can use their votes to bring it down, holding a sword of Damocles above it. So it's thought most likely that Emmanuel Macron will try and find yet another centrist figure, perhaps try and find a technocratic government. But it's difficult to see someone who's going to have more success. Probably been having a few names up his sleeve. He's only just arrived back from Saudi Arabia on a state visit. So it's quite embarrassing for him on the world stage. And he's got Donald Trump flying into Paris this weekend for ceremonies marking the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral. So this is the last thing he wants. He wants it out of the way quickly. But given the state of French politics at the moment, I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
Yeah, he says he wants it done within 24 hours, but it does feel impossible. Catherine Norris-Trent, thank you to you. Just finally to you, Charlotte Minvielle. It's all very well suggesting he goes for a candidate from the coalition of left-wing parties. But as Catherine's explaining there, that means the right may just cause trouble again and block whatever your pick for Prime Minister would try and do. It feels like an impossible circle here of doom, where you won't be able to get anything done. The country just gets further into debt. Here is a Prime Minister, now gone, Michel Barnier, who was trying to sort out some of the economic situation in France, the difficulty of being so much in debt, and that includes cutting public spending, that includes looking at things like pensions. Yes. So where do you go with it?
But the Prime Minister here got entangled into a hostage situation with the far right. He decided...
How do you know that a left-wing candidate wouldn't get caught in the same hostage situation?
Because we would try and build consensus to try and get support from the central bloc on a case-by-case bill situation, and we would try to build an alliance. But basically what Michel Barnier now has done is not only failure of a short-lived government, but also dishonor, because there was a press release today showing that he tried to lean in and speak to Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader, to try and get approval from her on the budget, when let's not forget that many of the MPs from the centre and on the right got elected thanks to the vote of the left-wing voters with this Republican front that we did during those elections. And so they should have been leaning towards us and towards our alliance rather than to the far right like they did today.
Charlotte Minvielle there, putting the case forward for the coalition of left-wing parties, the New Popular Front, and why it makes sense to involve them in those conversations. As Catherine Norris-Trent from France 24 said, it is unlikely Macron will try and find another solution, all the while his position remains Well, he remains in office, of course he does, but this does not make him look particularly strong. Just to repeat that, Michel Barnier, the French Prime Minister, has lost that confidence vote. 331 politicians voting in favour of the no confidence motion. They only needed to reach 288, but it went up to 331.